My name is Barb. I like to start my story in 2015 when I was 52. I hit a codependent bottom when I invited a homeless friend from church to stay overnight at my house, which I now know isn't normal. I had just started volunteering on a project at church to serve homeless people, and this guy Dan started coming as a parishioner to my church, and I felt like it was like, oh, divine intervention, God
Mhm.
introducing me to a homeless person so that I would know something about homeless people and I would be serving like homeless people, not the homeless. And he actually was very helpful to me. So a few months into our friendship, we had a really big snowstorm here in New Haven, Connecticut. And I invited him to stay at my home rather than at the homeless shelter because he had horrible things to say about shelters. And he mostly didn't stay in them, but like in a snowstorm, it makes sense to go inside. And so he stayed, and then another time, and then another time. And within a few weeks, Vernon, he was practically living with me. And I soon felt like I was trapped in my own home. So he was a self-proclaimed addict and alcoholic. And I now think on reflection, he maybe had a personality disorder because this guy fucked with my head in a way I had never experienced. So one
Mm.
day I was in therapy, which by the way, I had been in therapy since I was about 15, not continuously, but very close.
Mhm.
And I was talking about Dan, and in the middle of a sentence, I stopped and I went, "Oh my God, do you think I need to go to Al-Anon?" And my therapist was like, "Yes." So whatever I
Okay.
put into Google, Vernon, looking
Mhm.
for Al-Anon, this word codependent came up. And I'd never heard it. And I was like, how is this possible? I've been in therapy for 37 years. I've read
Mm.
7 gajillion self-help books. I've done workshops and workbooks. I've gone to seminars and retreats and spiritual groups and support groups and I'd never heard this word. So I started going to Codependence Anonymous and I very quickly felt a sense of relief. And I think it was partly knowing there's this thing that describes me. Because I remember saying to my therapist, like, how did I not know this about me after all my introspection and work? And she said, Barb, I think for you, that codependence is kind of a unifying concept and it pulls together a bunch of different things that you did know about yourself. You just didn't know they were connected. And at first, I thought she was saying it to be nice to me, to like soften the blow of the realization that I'm codependent. But as time went on, I realized that she was right. And also very quickly, I remember saying to someone, Vernon, which may have been Dan, I was like, I think I need to be reparented. But I thought that I
Mm.
made up the term reparented. I didn't know that that was a thing. And then six
Yeah.
weeks into going to CODA, which is like the, code name for Codependence Anonymous, I went to Cape Cod, Massachusetts to visit my longtime friends, one of whom had been in AA for like 10 years at that point, and she had always just raved about how radically her life was transformed from AA. And I was like, "You're gonna love this. I'm going to Codependence Anonymous." And she was like, "Oh, great. Let's see if we can find a CODA meeting while you're here and we'll go." Well, she couldn't find one, but she found an ACA meeting, which I knew of as ACOA, Adult Children of Alcoholics. But
Mhm.
I did not believe that I qualified, and I also never really understood why do adult children of alcoholics need a program of recovery.
Mhm.
So I was like, "I'll go for you," because I'm a self-sacrificing kind of person, or I was. I didn't
Right.
think I needed to go. And I walk in, and in the opening readings, one of the things they say is we reparent ourselves. And I was like, "What? Like, that's a
Yeah.
thing?" And
Yeah.
then they read the list of the 14 traits of an adult child, and I was like, "Oh my God, I do belong here." And I learned it's
Mm.
actually adult children of alcoholics and dysfunctional families, and for
Families.
that, I qualify.
I
So Peggy
actually
tells me what was that?
uh, I actually have those books.
Yeah, yeah, me
I do a lot of studying out of
yeah,
those
yeah, it's
books.
just some really deep stuff.
Yeah, let me ask you this. What were some of the things that you were to doing for this homeless guy to
I was feeding him, I was letting him sleep on my couch, I was doing his laundry, I was giving him, like, a dollar here, a dollar there, I was buying him cigarettes, I was driving him places, you know,
Mhm.
enabling the
Yeah.
shit out of him, you know?
Right.
And I
Right.
later found out that he was stealing, and selling stuff and stealing and, like, bringing it to my house and stuff, and I was just so naive that I believed things that he said to me. And
Yeah.
actually, you know what's funny is I'm pretty sure that he said to me, "You know, you don't trust me." And I acted like, "Well, if I just trust him enough, then I mean, if I just,
Yeah.
like, love on him enough, then he'll turn into a trustworthy person." And, like, he's not the only person. That's, like, with everybody that I dated too, and the same thing with friends and employers and stuff like that. So, that
Okay.
was a pattern that came up, but
Let me ask you this. You say you went to therapy a lot
mhm,
for years. What'd you say, like 32
decade,
years or something?
37.
37 years.
Yeah.
What was the difference between therapy and a
Massive.
12-step
Like,
program?
so the way that I think of all that work I did, the therapy, the books, the workshops, I feel like that stuff scratched the surface of the iceberg of my life, and recovery
Mhm.
melted the iceberg of my life.
Okay.
And so I think the difference is, 1, there's a plan of action. Like, the 12 steps are a technology for making change in your life, and it's a system. Like, you go through step 1, then step 2. Number 2,
Mhm.
it's a group program where the people who are like me, some of whom have recovered, some of whom are recovering, and some of whom just got here, are there. And I'm hearing stories. I'm able to identify things about myself that I never saw before because somebody told me a story. And I was like, you just put words to my experience that I could have never named before. And number
Mhm.
3, it's a spiritual program. And I grew up agnostic, and when I was 37, I read the book Conversations with God by Neil Donald Walsh, and I, like, over the
Okay.
weekend of reading that book, became a believer in my conception of God. So by the time I
Mhm.
15 years later is when I got into recovery, and by then I identified as a spiritual person. But what I found in recovery was that I wasn't using God. I wasn't asking God for guidance. I wasn't
Mhm.
handing things over. I wasn't turning my will and my life over. And so I learned, like, I feel like I have a relationship with God now,
Mm.
whereas that
Okay.
was just not a thing before. So
Okay.
I mean, so much changed, so much changed. Yeah.
So you're a boundary coach, am I correct?
Right, yeah. So,
So
if it's okay, I'd like to just finish the story about, like, that
yeah,
first
go ahead. Go ahead.
meeting
Yeah.
there. So
Mhm.
so, my friend told me that I sobbed the whole rest of the meeting. I don't remember that, but I bought the literature for ACA. I came home, I started going to a meeting. Very quickly, a women's meeting started in ACA. That's my home meeting now. And then
Mhm.
I got into a step group and we did the steps. And so I really actively worked the program in ACA, whereas in CODA, I was just going to meetings. So that went
Mhm.
on for a year and I was seeing massive changes. And I finally decided to let go of CODA because it was just maybe like a 75% fit. And that turned out to be a higher powered situation because I was going to CODA on Mondays. And then I got 12 stepped into Overeaters Anonymous by one of the women I was doing the steps with in OA. And I was like, oh my God, I'm a compulsive overeater, which I didn't even know
Mhm.
was a thing. So I am now down over 100 pounds from my top weight. I've been at my goal weight for 7.5 years. And in that program, we call it abstinent. So that's like being
Mhm.
sober in AA. So I've been abstinent for 9.5 years. And I drank abusively until I was in my 40s. I smoked bales of weed. I put myself in harm's way, was in toxic situations, toxic relationships, did all the stuff.
Mhm.
And, so I'm not an addict and I'm not an alcohol I mean, I'm a food addict, but I'm not like a drug addict or an alcoholic, but I did abuse those things. And my
Okay.
life is just so utterly transformed because I got tools in recovery.
Right.
And Vernon, I think of my core wound as the codependence. Like the reason that I ate and I drugged and I drank and all that stuff was because of my codependence, which I now
Okay.
know is a result of childhood trauma and intergenerational family dysfunction. So when I learned to form boundaries, they're basically the antidote to codependence. It changed everything. So, a couple years after being in recovery, I got laid off from my job. I worked at Yale University for 19 years. And then
Mhm.
I found my way just sort of serendipitously into the world of startups and innovation and entrepreneurship in New Haven and at Yale. Started my own business as a coach and consultant. And in the beginning, I was just kind of like a coach and then realized I had to have a niche. So becoming a boundaries coach just really made sense for me.
Got it. You said it changed your life. How so? How do setting boundaries
Yeah.
change your life?
Yeah, and, like, how much time do you have? Because it's just incredible. I mean, I think the one way that most people like to hear about and can identify with is that I never had a healthy romantic relationship before. I had when I did my relationship inventory, I had 28 men on that list that everybody from I dated them to a few times to I lived with them for years,
Mhm.
and I'm now, for the first time, in the only healthy relationship I have ever had, and we've been together October will be 7 years. And it's
Okay.
because I know who I am. I know what's okay with me and not okay with me. I know what I like, want, need, and prefer. And I actually
Mhm.
communicate that to my partner instead of expecting him to know stuff.
Mhm.
And when things come up that bother me, I name them immediately without blame. And I don't walk around complaining about him all the time. Like when I used to get together with girlfriends, what we did was complain. And whenever there was a woman who like didn't complain about her person, whether it was a man or a woman, I was always like, the fuck's the matter with her? Like, this is what we do. And now I know like that's super unhealthy.
Mhm.
For me, learning how to build healthy boundaries was about me getting to know myself because I was such a people pleasing, like chameleon enabler, just accommodating, overgiving other people that I really didn't know. I mean, I knew some things about me, but I really didn't know like what was okay and not okay because I just acted like everything was okay because I never thought about me and what do I want and what do I like and what do I prefer. It was always like, what does he need? What does she need? What do they need? What does the situation need? What does the organization need?
Yeah.
And what's interesting about that is people hear that and they think, oh, so you became selfish. Nope, not at all. So before recovery, I thought of myself as a volunteeraholic. Like to this day, I've volunteered for 16 different nonprofit organizations. But
Mhm.
now I actually donate more hours per week to community service. And for me, it's all in 12-step recovery than I ever did before. But
Okay.
I do it in a way that's sustainable. So I do it strategically rather than at the drop of a hat. I do it by choice, not by some sense of obligation or some compulsion to fix
Mhm.
things. And I do it after filling my cup first. So I don't know if you've ever heard of Ashley Kirkwood. She wrote the book Speak Your Way to Cash. And she says you
Mhm.
want to pour from the overflow rather than trying to pour from an empty cup. And the only way you can have overflow in your cup is if you fill it first. So I've learned to like really do things that energize me and take care of me. And there's
Okay.
so many more ways that boundaries have changed me, and I'm sure we can probably get to that.
Okay. Well, you bring a lot to the table. Let's slow down a little bit.
Okay.
Cause you said it helped you. These
Mhm.
things help you. And
Mhm.
what type of work are you doing?
Mhm.
Okay. What type of the people that's listening right here, they want to
Mhm.
know what type of work are you actually doing
Mhm.
in the 12-step
Yeah.
program that
Yeah.
helped you get to this childhood trauma, this
Yeah.
awareness? And what was it like?
Mhm.
What was you going through in the
Mhm.
process? Was it easy to just open
No.
up to
Hell
your
no.
sponsor? No, I
Mm.
mean,
Yeah, yeah.
what was the
Okay.
process?
Sure. So in my area, there were no sponsors in ACA when I started. And so we formed a 12-step group, and ACA has a yellow 12-step workbook, and we worked through that. And it
Hmm.
was not easy and it was painful AF. And I hit bottom with sugar while I was on step 4 in ACA. However, it was finite pain that I got past and was healing. So there, as they say in recovery, there is no healing without feeling. So
Hmm.
the way that I talk about ACA is it's a trauma recovery program where you reparent yourself and you use the 12 steps to recover. So
What is
I didn't.
reparenting? Let me just jump
Okay,
in
so
right
I'll
there
talk
for the
about that.
listen.
Sure.
What it actually is
Sure,
reparenting?
sure. So I didn't know that I had trauma, And that's kind of the core issue for most people nowadays. Like, we're
Mhm.
realizing it's rampant. So,
Yeah.
um, reparenting, it can mean as simple as you are good and kind to yourself instead of beating the crap out of yourself with all your negative self-talk. And it can also mean as full-blown as creating this imaginary cast of characters in your head, like an inner loving parent, like renaming that critical voice as your inner critical parent, and then
Mhm.
getting in touch with your inner children. And when I first started in the program, one of the first things that I did, which was a recommendation from the book, was to get a picture of myself as a child that I love and look at it very regularly and look her in the eye, because it's really easy to be loving to a little innocent child. And I sort of organically one day started singing this song to this girl. It was a song I heard on the radio that I was like, "What is that song?" And it's called "The Reason" by Hoobastank. And the words in it that really got me, Vernon, were, "I found a reason for me to change who I used to be, a reason to start over new, and the reason is you." So I would sing that song to her. And nobody told me to do it. It just sort of came up, and I did it for about a year. And I didn't even realize until maybe 2 years later that that was part of me reparenting. I didn't really understand that. The other thing that's recommended is that in order to get in contact with your inner child, is that you write with your non-dominant hand. So you start
Mhm.
by writing a letter with your dominant hand to get to know the child, and then you respond, and there's something that, like, bypasses the conscious mind that
Mhm.
allows you to tap into the I don't understand, it doesn't matter. I don't understand electricity either. It doesn't matter. I know that it works, right?
Right.
So I did that a few times, and usually I did it either I was in an ACA workshop on inner child stuff, or most of the time when things were really bad and I was like super triggered.
Mhm.
And so I feel like I dabbled in the reparenting stuff, but I think like the first recommendation is to cultivate an inner loving parent in your
Mhm.
mind. And so what a lot of people in ACA says, like, how do I know what a loving parent is? I didn't have that. So what I usually recommend when I work with like new sponsees is pick a character from the world. It could be someone from TV or movies or a book. It could be a
Mhm.
historical figure. It could be like your third grade teacher that you loved. So for example, I have one friend in ACA. Her inner loving parents are Big Bird from Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers. Because she's like,
Mhm.
I don't know how to be loving, but I know how they would talk to me. So you have
Okay.
this inner loving parent, and when you keep like connecting with that inner loving parent and you keep hearing their messages, it kind of takes away some of the space from that critical voice because you're bringing in something good as opposed to pushing away something bad. And
Yeah.
then the theory is once you have this inner loving parent that's present regularly, your inner child feels safe to share. Now, what happened for me about 8 years into my ACA recovery, so like 2.5 years ago now, is I heard this woman, Susan Anderson, on the Adult Child podcast, which, by the way, if you're even thinking that you might be an adult child, I highly recommend the Adult Child podcast with Andrea Ashley. Well, Susan
Mhm.
Anderson is a trauma expert. And she said, if you really want to repair the relationship with your inner child, there's two things you need to do. One, you need to make consistent, conscious contact with your inner child. And number two, you need to make tiny little promises to your inner child and keep them. So I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. So before
Okay.
that, the only time I connected with my inner child was when the shit hit the fan or I was at a workshop, and I only knew how to do it with the non-dominant handwriting. So I was like, I'm gonna Monday, Wednesday, Friday night when I'm doing my nightly journaling, I'm gonna connect with my inner child just for the heck of it. And it was amazing. Like if you want to
Mhm.
get to know if you want to have a relationship with somebody, spend time with them. So I'm spending time with my inner child, and all of a sudden it was like she was real to me where she kind of wasn't really before. And then
Mhm.
eventually, I didn't need to do the non-dominant handwriting. I could just close my eyes. And now I don't have to. And so, and
Okay.
I made promises. Like in the beginning, she was like, I want an allowance. And I was like, okay. And she goes, I want $5. And I was like, no, you're getting a quarter, a
Okay.
week. And then
Let
she's
me
like, "I
ask you
want you to take
this.
me shopping every week to spend it." And I was like, "No, we can go
Right,
shopping
right.
once a month."
Let
So
me
it was
ask you this. Let me ask you this real quick. How does the inner child ties into your codependency? Without doing the
mm.
work, where did the inner child show up in your life? If she did show up in your life.
Yeah, it's really hard for me to answer that because I feel like I really healed my codependence before I got into real close contact with my inner child. So that's I don't know how to answer that, but that's an excellent question, and I wish I could say more, but I did so much work for so long on the codependence, and I was a boundaries coach by the time I really did the intense inner
Hmm.
child work. So I have very solid boundaries now. I talk about them all day, every day. I teach other people how to have boundaries. So
Right,
the codependence just really wasn't an issue any longer. And the other
right.
thing, I was just talking to my
Wait,
sponsor.
wait, one second,
Yeah.
one second, boy. Let me ask you this then. Did you feel love growing up as a child from
I
your
felt loved
parents?
by my mom. I felt loved, but my mom was
Okay,
also like the quintessential enabler. Like we basically had an opium den in my basement. Like she literally let
okay.
us smoke weed and drink in our basement. So she would
Hmm.
know where we were rather than out in the streets.
So that made you feel loved?
She made me feel loved, but she also like feelings were not okay. We weren't talking about feelings. We pretended shit was not happening that was. She gaslighted me. So that's you bring up a really good point. Your parents can be dysfunctional and traumatize you and love you. So it's not two completely different, like you can have loving parents who were also abusive. You can have loving parents who also traumatized you. So just
Okay.
because you were loved, it doesn't mean you weren't traumatized, and it doesn't mean you didn't grow up in dysfunction, and it doesn't mean that your parents never did anything wrong. The difference for me now, Vernon, is
Hmm.
that I have way more compassion, especially for my father, than I did. When I got into recovery, I had a gigantic chip on my shoulder about my dad. And now, like, I
Okay.
really truly get he did the best that he could. It wasn't good enough, but he
Hmm.
couldn't have done any different, just like I couldn't have done any different.
Right. So did you learn to forgive your
Oh, yeah.
parents?
I mean, I worked on forgiveness for years with my dad before recovery. I kicked him out of my life from 1994 to 2005. And for much of that time, I read a ton of books. I even went to a retreat on forgiveness. I said mantras about forgiveness. And I finally, when I read the book, I think it's called The Wisdom of Forgiveness by the Dalai Lama, it was the first thing I ever read that actually talked about how to forgive, because everything else was about why you should forgive, which I think is important to know. And then, of course, I
Hmm.
had to do more of that in recovery. And yeah, and
Right.
what's interesting is my dad, both my parents are deceased now. My dad, now that he is deceased and now that I've done all this reparenting work, I have recast my dad in my inner family as a new loving dad. And you know what? When he came into my inner world, he said to
Hmm.
me, "Barb, I went to heaven to get parenting lessons." And I was like, "Oh my God, I bet they have the best parenting lessons there." So it's like
Right.
this new dad understands child development. He understands feelings. He understands positive reinforcement. He understands constantly criticizing someone is not loving, you
Hmm.
know?
Okay, for the women out there, or just people out there that's struggling with setting boundaries, their
Mhm.
first boundary, because setting boundaries is that can be a challenge. What advice would you give them?
Yeah, I have volumes of advice. I think first I want to talk about what a boundary is because there's a lot of myths and misconceptions. So they're essentially standards that you have for your life, hopefully that you live up to. And so then you have limits for yourself and limits for other people that uphold your standards. So health is a good example most people can identify with. So health is really important to me now because I abused and neglected myself most of my life, and I want to
Mhm.
reverse that now. So that's a standard I have. So a limit that I have that helps me uphold my standard of health is I go to bed by 10:30 at night. I don't stay up until all hours of the night anymore the way that I used to, like watching Netflix and smoking weed and cigarettes and drinking and doing all that stuff. And then a
Mhm.
limit that I have for other people that upholds my health is I don't allow people to smoke in my home. So that's an example of a boundary. I think, when you're getting started, so the number one question that I get after what's a boundary is how do I get past the guilt and shame? Because people feel guilty and shameful when they try to set boundaries for themselves. And it's typically because you have always been so focused on other people and you've been taught that it is somehow selfish to even have needs, never mind ask to have them met. And
Mhm.
so the way to get over the guilt and shame it's not quick and fast. It's more of a long game, but it's to really focus internally on what matters to you. So when I work with clients, I have them go through a process to determine their top 5 values and then like what are the values, what do they mean to me and why are they important to me? And when you start making decisions based on what's important to you, when you start setting boundaries, it's easier to withstand other people's judgments. So, for example, if I set a boundary with you, Vernon, that was to uphold my health and you got upset with me for it, I can handle it because it's about my health, right?
Mhm.
I can be okay with you being upset with me, whereas in the past, I couldn't live with people being upset with me.
Right.
So the best way to start building boundaries is with yourself. So I know for me, one of the first boundaries I did was I had this ex-boyfriend who would continue to email me, and if I saw an email from him, I felt compelled to open it immediately. And
Okay.
I had to be told, like, I'm not dumb, but I had to be told, "Barb, you don't have to open the email when you see it." And I eventually realized I don't have to open it at all. That took me like 2 years to figure that out. But I
Mhm.
just was like, "I'm gonna not open that email until I have the psychic space to deal with it." So my first boundaries were with me because nobody
Okay.
else is involved, and then I can deal with all the stuff that comes up internally, and I don't have to deal with it with anybody else. Then, once you start setting boundaries with yourself, the next boundaries to set are boundaries with easygoing people. So you're not gonna go to the most difficult person in your life and set a boundary with them to start.
Mhm.
You're gonna
Okay.
start with people who are like easygoing people and say things like, "That doesn't work for me," or "I can't make it," or "Please don't do that." Something that, a reasonable person is gonna be like, "Oh, okay. Thank you for telling me." And
Mhm.
then as you get better and better and better at it, it's like a muscle. Literally is like a muscle. And here I do this twice monthly coaching group for women. It's called the Guilt Free Guild. And last week I was saying to them, I don't set boundaries. I have boundaries. They're part of who I am now. In the beginning, it was like set the boundaries, set boundaries, set boundaries, set boundaries, set boundaries. And then you just eventually just integrate them into your beingness. You come to know yourself as a new person who is worthy of having needs and getting their needs met mostly by yourself. For
Mhm.
me, I didn't know this, Vernon, but a lot of my like rescuing and fixing and saving and helping behavior was because I felt like that's what I had to do to get people's approval. And now I understand it's fine to seek other people's approval, but only if I have my own approval first. So I would do things that
Mhm.
put me in harm's way, that violated my values, that were against what I just said that I was going to do so that I could get people's approval. But I didn't know that I was doing that. And
Okay. And
now,
why? Let me just jump in here. Why do you think you had problems? I know you
because of the
said
family,
childhood trauma. You said
yeah,
childhood
childhood
trauma,
trauma, family
but
dysfunction. Yeah.
Yeah, childhood trauma.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is that you had problems saying you'll say yes when you want to say no.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
Okay,
But saying
and
no wasn't an
for the
option for me. It just
hmm
wasn't. I didn't even conceive of saying no. It was just not, I mean, of
right.
course, obviously, in reality, it's an option, but in my mind, it never occurred to me. And when I started
I got you. Let me finish.
Oh, sorry.
Childhood trauma. That's okay. Childhood trauma. What about childhood trauma that you learned through this work that you're doing
Mhm.
prevented you from saying no when you want to? I know because childhood trauma. What about it?
Yeah.
What was about you
Yeah.
that made you feel that you need to take care of all these people? That you need to say yes. What did you learn about yourself?
So,
Yeah, I
you
know it's childhood trauma, but what
right.
about you? Did you feel not loved? Did you hate yourself? I mean, what about it?
No, I I felt loved at times. I did not hate myself.
Mhm.
That's not most people that I know in ACA hated themselves. I had a
Okay.
lot of negative self-talk, but I didn't even know that I had it until I was, like, in my late 20s, and then I thought I cleaned it up, and then I got in recovery, I was like, there was a lot more. I thought I was a nice person, Vernon. I thought, "I'm nice. I help people because 'cause I'm a nice person." And the thing is, like, I can see now, I was afraid to be seen as a bad person, and to me, a bad person was someone who says no and isn't helpful.
Mhm.
And I thought people who said no and had limits were rude people, and that was like, no. Like, that's the message that I got. So I had this
Yeah.
behavior modeled for me by my mom, and now I realize also by my dad. But it wasn't safe in my family to have feelings and to say, I'm scared or I'm sad. So I had to
Right.
put on a happy face because I was gonna be ridiculed or I was gonna be
See,
humiliated or
now
it
you're
was gonna
talking.
be
Now you're talking.
right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
or
And we want to ask that, boy. I mean, because we want to ask that there's people
yeah,
that's listening to you
yeah,
that's going through that, and they
right,
thinking like, okay,
right,
you doing this work. What
yeah,
was it? Because they
yeah,
feeling a certain
yeah,
way
yeah,
because
yeah,
the program that you're talking about is
mhm,
adult children of
mhm,
alcoholics. Watch this,
and
and dysfunctional
dysfunctional
families.
families,
We
yeah.
can't minimize that dysfunctional
No
family.
kidding, yep,
Yes, some are with love, but the bulk of
mhm,
people that's in recovery, the
mhm,
bulk of people that using drugs,
mhm,
they come from trauma and they come from
mhm.
dysfunctional families. And,
Yes,
so,
yeah,
and one thing about it, a lot of people
yeah,
try to, well, I'm learning, they
mhm,
be in meetings, they be on podcasts, but they
mhm,
don't want to talk about their families because
mhm,
they still don't want to look a certain way. And
right,
no, that's it's not okay to talk to a child a certain
mhm,
way. It's
mhm,
not okay to tell a child you're to be seen and not heard. People, we
mhm,
need to let
mhm,
people know it's
right,
okay to
yeah,
talk about your
right,
dysfunctional family. It's
yeah,
okay. Okay.
right,
I
you
just
know,
wanted to get, cause I know listeners are
yeah.
listening to you because you got a powerful message. Yeah.
Yeah,
Go
and
ahead.
you bring up a really good point because a struggle that many people have when they first get into ACA is that they're really afraid that they're being disloyal to their family. And what
Hmm.
we say is you're not being disloyal to your family, you're being disloyal to the dysfunction by naming it. So
Yeah.
naming reality, what actually happened. I was spanked or I was molested or I was cut or my bones were broken or I was, shut in a room. Like those are facts. It
Yeah.
doesn't help anybody to pretend that that shit did not happen. And,
Right.
one of the things that happened for me, Vernon, when I first got in, it was really clear that I did not have it objectively as bad as many of the people in the room that I first started going to recovery in. Like people were brutalized. I wasn't. So
Mhm.
I was like, I knew I had the traits that were on the 14 trait list, but I didn't know how
Mhm.
I got them. And the people were saying trauma. And I was like, I knew that like when I was a teenager, something traumatizing happened that my dad
Mhm.
tried to strangle me, but I didn't know. I figured, oh, I was almost grown and that didn't qualify. But then I learned that the absence of good things happening can result in trauma. And I was like, oh, that's me. And then I later heard at a meditation teacher who would say this: you have experienced 100% of your trauma and 0% of other people's trauma. Stop comparing trauma. You can't
Mhm.
compare pain to pain. There are people who grow up in the same family and have
Mhm.
very similar experiences, and one of them is traumatized and one is not. We don't understand who, like, you can't say, well,
Mhm.
I didn't have it as bad as them. Maybe you didn't, but it doesn't mean you don't deserve healing. And so I used to make excuses when I first got in of like why I was there. And then I finally stopped making excuses. And one of the things that I learned is that the threat of violence can have just as traumatizing of an impact on a child as actual violence. So my
Yeah.
dad, one of the things he would say is, I'm gonna knock you into next week. And I remember I was so little that I thought he meant he was gonna hit me so hard that I would fly through time, which is
Mhm.
hard. I didn't
Yeah.
understand that I'm gonna hit you and you're gonna be unconscious for a week. I mean, I
Yeah.
knew that it was bad. And then the other thing, to me, this is the worst thing my dad said to me. He said, "Do you want me to give you a reason to cry?" And the reason I say it was the worst thing, Vernon, is because I was actually crying and I was a little kid. And like when you're little, you don't understand the world. You don't
Yeah.
understand things. So I'm like, wait, I am crying. So are you
Mhm.
telling me that I don't have a reason to cry? Like it was just crazy making. And
Yeah.
this is my dad. Like he's teaching me how to be in the world.
Right.
And so he would
Right.
say, "Do you want me to give you a reason to cry?" And it was like, "What the fuck?" Except for that I
Right.
didn't have
Right.
a what the fuck expression as a kid. It was just
Right.
like, what? So I have to not have a reason to cry.
Did
So I
you
have
feel
to,
accepted by your pops, your dad? Did you
yeah,
feel accepted as a child?
yeah, right. And to not,
Did you? You did feel accepted by
no,
him?
no,
Okay,
I
that's what
did
I was
not.
asking you.
I never
Okay,
did.
okay.
No, I
Now,
always,
with that being said,
yeah,
now do you think not being accepted by your father has something to do with you growing up being a codependent?
absolutely, 100%.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay, all right,
100%.
okay.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I felt like he wanted a completely different daughter. He wanted a daughter
Mm,
who was like super feminine and like a cheerleader and really girly. And it's not like I was somewhat girly, but I just wasn't the daughter that he wanted. And my brother wasn't, my brothers weren't the sons he wanted either. He wanted like, athletes. And my brother was like a scholar, and my younger brother was like, didn't give a fuck about anything,
yeah,
And so we just really got the message, like, you're not who I want you to be. And so you
yeah.
contort yourself because of course you want your parents' approval.